No-Senya is by far the best unit for Epic Hell Phase 1, but not everybody has her, especially for newer players because she's kind of useless now. There wasn't really much of a reason to build her. So here are two alternative teams in case you don't have Senya. If you do have Senya, toss her into Grace of Growth. She makes Phase 1 much easier. I'd say this fire team is definitely the better of the two. The only downside is you have to use up Scermia, who is really good for Phase 3. So if you're trying to not do that and you don't have the alternatives are also kind of scuffed. I haven't tested them, but I'm thinking Bihu or Cecelia, where you lean more on Flan as your main DPS. And then you just provoke with Cecilia, and then Bihu Cecelia hit the ads. That could be something, but it's also a little bit scuffed. The other team, though, is this Christy, Bellona, as a Hawk. I don't think there's any replacements for this, sadly. So this is a little bit limited, and it's much more RNG. But this is a team that does work. So for Cecilia, you want 85 effectiveness and 200 FRES with a good amount of speed, because you want her to be moving first. The rest of the stats can go into bulk. Not too important for her bulk, because you clear this phase really fast. For EE, the main stat's probably the most important part. You just want to max it out, and if you're gonna craft it, then you might as well get decreased speed, because it's her best one overall. Then Artifact doesn't matter too much, because you clear this phase really fast, but Aureus can help if you're taking a lot of damage on your Scermia. For skill enhances, you technically don't need any of them. These +4s are for Expedition. While this +4 would be nice to hit 100% provoke, you can just reset if you miss it because it's the first skill of the fight. And this is generally not useful anyways. Next up is Flan. She's just Destruction, ideally Pen. This is just random gear because this account does not have Flan gear. You want attack, crit damage, and a good amount of speed. Not faster than Cecilia, and lower attack than Scermia is all that really matters here. For Artifact, Daydream Joker is probably better. I'm actually not sure whether Scermia or Flan is a better holder of Daydream Joker, but as long as one of them has it, you probably overkill the boss anyways. If you only have 2 Daydream Jokers, you probably want to save your second one for Phase 3, so just use one for Phase 1 if you only have 2. And lastly, there's Scermia. I have her holding Daydream Joker, but like I mentioned, you could have Flan on Daydream Joker and Scermia on some other damage boosting artifact, like the special strawberry shortcake. For E, it doesn't matter too much. Bear can be nice for helping you tank if you need it, or you could use the S1 extra attack. For Imprint, I just have her on crit chance, so it lowers her stats a little bit, but concentration would be better, yes. And then for her stats, it's just crit chance, crit damage, and attack. You just don't want her to be too slow, because you want her to be able to S2, S3, and then S1. And if the boss pushes her back too much, if your speed is really low, you might not be able to get a turn in. Okay, so managed to land both provokes. 2 hits towards the 5 count, and we can AoE with her S1 for another 2. Now we cleanse Decaying Curse, and while it might sound a little bit counterintuitive, we're going to S3 into the small guy. And now we're going to S2 here. So we can Soul Burn Flan's S3 to ignore FRES. Like I mentioned, if you want to save the souls for a later phase, you can just give your Flan 85 effectiveness, and that should be, and then just play the RNG with it getting resisted or not. Because depending on your sub, you might need those 10 souls for later. Now you can just do this, and you're clear. First up is Christy. You need 85 effectiveness and 200 FRES. She does have self-imprint for effect resistance, but I hit 200 without it, so I'm just on the team defense one. And then for Artifact, if you're not using Bastion for the FRES, you should probably be using Proof of Valor for the damage reduction. You also do want a good amount of speed, because you want her to move first ideally, which can be RNG depending on if the pushback gets resisted by the other two. But somewhere around like this would be good enough. It depends on the speed of your other units too. And you do want her S1 maxed for the effect chance. Next up, we can take a look at Bellona. I have her S1 and S3 maxed, but her S2 is not. This would be a little bit of extra damage though. Her EE doesn't matter, you just want the effectiveness from it. You guys need 85, which I'm one short, but it is what it is. The rest of the stats are into attack, crit chance, and crit damage, with a good amount of speed. And I have her on Bloodstone for a bit of sustain. For the speed, I'm not sure whether having Zahak or Bologna go first is better. I think it might actually be better to have Bologna go first, but that's not how I set it up, and I'm kind of gear limited anyways. But you can probably clear regardless of who is going first. Not the most important part. And lastly, Zahak, Daydream Joker for damage, this for attack buff. And then all you really need for him is attack, 50% crit chance because he gets 50% from free from his skills, and crit damage, and then speed somewhere around this. So you want him as the highest attack at the very least so he can tank the Decaying Curse and then cleanse it with his S2. But because you don't S3 immediately with Bologna, it doesn't actually matter if Bologna goes first because you won't be landing Death Break yet. So it is fine to have Zahak be the slower one, like I mentioned. But this is just the setup that I was using and it works fine. Here at the start of the fight, Zahak didn't resist the pushback, so we can just provoke this guy, and we got a dual attack, which we can ignore because it doesn't really change much. S2 into Bologna to cleanse, and then we S1 him, and now we S2 with Bologna for immunity buff. So we had good RNG here. Sometimes Christy will actually cut that mob, but having him go ahead of you is a little bit better because then you don't have to worry about the cleanse ever happening. We can just provoke him again, and it got dispelled there, but normally you would still have one stack left, in which case this Bologna S3 would be the one to dispel the mana. We landed our Death Break, which is good, and we can S3 into the boss for damage. That turn where Bologna or Zahak goes first is also inconsistent. Depends on who gets pushed back, or whether or not Zahak gets pushed back by the boss's S1. But regardless of whoever gets pushed back, you will have enough damage to clear this phase so long as you landed that first Death Break with Bologna. We S3 for attack buff and healing even if it's not necessary, because you do more than enough damage with Soulburn, Zahak S1 and Bologna S1, S3 in order to move into the next phase. So we're going to provoke the slower mob as usual. Zahak S2 into Bologna, and then S1, and we S2 for immunity buff. Okay, so here is the bad RNG I was talking about, where you cut this mob. Because this mob is going to move right after Christy, and you won't get a chance to hit it with anybody else. So you will have to hit it again with another provoke. You can see the mana is still here. We're going to S3 anyways for Death Break. And then Zahak S3 into the boss for damage. And we will have to S1 again to provoke. And that dispels the mana buff. And we can S1, S3 to phase. Even with that, we can just Soulburn S1 and we can clear. So that is a little bit RNG there because we got really bad luck with the mob going for Christy. And also the boss pushed itself up a lot. So you can see it cut both Bologna and Zahak and it wasn't really close. But normally, or sometimes I guess, the boss will go after Bologna and Zahak, which is much better because then it won't land the Decaying Curse or anything. So it was a little bit RNG on whether or not Zahak would crit there. Not sure if we had enough damage to kill even if we don't crit. So Zahawk resisted the pushback there. So he goes first, which is not great. And one thing here is you have to be a little bit careful, 15%. And Bellona is way behind Christy this time. So we can push her up. Sometimes Bellona, due to speed RNG and maybe resisting the pushback on S3, if you S2 Bellona there, she will cut Christy, which is pretty much a run under. But it's fine for us to S2 Bellona there because the CR's worked out. So we're going to provoke the slower mob and Bellona S2. Normally on that first turn with Zahawk, we S1 this guy, but since he wasn't provoked, there was no point in doing that. We just use S3. The other bad thing about Zahawk moving first is he will continue to move first, which also means that you won't be able to get that 5th hit in, so you will need to loop around at some point and get a 5th hit in. So we're gonna poke that guy again. S3 for Death Break. And now we can do this. We can silver an S1. And then we can S2, because the S2 with the attack buff should hit this provoke and also move it into the next phase. Yep, so you see that this mana got dispelled. Hopefully this helped out the people who do not have Senya. I think with ML Lua coming out, she could be a potential option, but I will not be rolling ML Lua, probably. So I will not be able to find out. Especially, I won't be rolling her on my ult at least, and my mate already did all 3 clears, so that'll have to be for somebody else to test.